Well, hello, cats and kittens. My name is Aji Slater, and here we're going to talk a little bit about uh, phlogiston. Yeah, the talk is Reflections on Phlogiston, Elements of Open Source in a New Systematic Order Containing All the Modern Discoveries. So, I am Aji, pronouns are they, them, and I am adorable, also a development team lead here at thoughtbot. And our story begins in the devastation of the 30 Years' War. The religious tensions of the Reformation finally boiling over to a pan-European conflict. The human toll was immense, with casualties in the millions. In a war filled with unprecedented loss of life, arguably the greatest atrocity was the sack of Magdeburg. Overrun by 40,000 men, a city of 25,000 was reduced to 5,000 in a horrific 4 days. The religious zeal of the war making inhumane treatment all the easier. Keeping it cheerful on a Friday. We follow survivor, Otto von Guericke, aged 29 at the time of the siege, born and raised in Magdeburg to a prominent family. His father and grandfather were lifelong members of the city council, both serving as mayor for a time. Young Otto was raised with great pride for his home. Magdeburg was one of the largest, most industrialized cities in what is now Germany. With ambitions to join in the politics and stewardship of Magdeburg, he studied with private tutors and schools throughout Europe. He studied law, but also mathematics, physics, and engineering. His studies were interrupted by news of his father's untimely passing, and he returned home, married, and picked up the mantle of city government as director of public works and soon the director of military affairs. Longing to see the ruins of Magdeburg rebuilt, he set out as a diplomatic representative, negotiating for the reconstruction of Germany and the return of Magdeburg's prosperity, even representing the city at the signing of the treaty that ended the 30 Years' War. May 8, 1654. A crowd has gathered in Regensburg. Assembled are members of the Imperial Diet and the Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand III. They've come to see Guericke's latest scientific innovation. 30 horses in 2 teams of 15, each harnessed to a copper hemisphere that have been placed together, only touching at the rims to form a copper globe. Though no fastener or adhesive holds them together, and still all the horses pulling together in opposite directions cannot separate them. This is a demonstration of what would come to be known as the Magdeburg hemispheres. Without air inside the sphere, air pressure is holding the halves together with more force than the horses could ever muster. And when air is allowed back between them, they fall apart easily. It's a display not only of Guericke's latest invention, the vacuum pump, but one that Guericke intends should bring recognition and wealth to a city under his charge. He didn't know that he was going to play a part in the creation of a whole new science. In the 16th and 17th centuries, ideas from ancient Greece remained the leading scientific theory. Empedocles and Aristotle supposed matter was made up of 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire, each indivisible and unknowable. Brilliant philosophers, but their scientific method was just vibes. Expanded upon in the 17th century by a man named Georg Ernst Stahl, combustion is the release of an ethereal substance called phlogiston. Matter releases its stored phlogiston when it burns. The released phlogiston is then absorbed by the air, and if a fire burns in a confined space, it will cease because the air has reached its capacity and cannot absorb more. A vacuum arrests a flame because there is no air to receive the phlogiston. Growing plants absorb phlogiston from the air, which is why air doesn't burn, but plants do. The corrosion of metals is also the process of dephlogisticating. Phlogiston theory was internally consistent, matching the level of experiments that were possible in 1664. It remained the leading theory for more than 100 years after the 1660s. Ironically, phlogiston theory was about to be unraveled by two of its greatest proponents. 1733. Joseph Priestley was raised an English dissenter. Protestants who had split from the Church of England, seeing the established church as too Catholic. Dissenters opposed state interference in social practices, so they built their own churches, educational institutions, and communities. His schooling was a combination of classrooms and tutors, with plenty of time for independent study. He entered Daventry Academy, a dissenter college which nurtured his zeal for ideas that challenged the status quo. Deeply religious, he believed that God could be experienced through examination of his design, and that science, education, and knowledge were a path to improving humanity. His studies led him to the priesthood, and his first appointment was to a small town where he was also the school teacher, with plenty of time for independent study. Rising to some renown, accepting a position as minister in Leeds in 1767, his science and philosophical writing there brought him to the attention of the second Earl of Shelburne, later the first Marquess of Lansdowne and England's Prime Minister. He offered Priestley a position as his librarian. Priestley took full advantage. The position gave him more access to materials for his experiments and plenty of time for independent study. An ardent supporter of phlogiston theory, Priestley studied gases, which he called airs. Testing what he called fixed air, he found it formed an effervescent solution when dissolved in water, inadvertently inventing soda water. 1774. In the laboratory at Lord Shelburne's estate in Wiltshire, Priestley holds a glass lens to the sunlight coming in from the windows, focusing it on a sample of mercuric oxide. Heating the compound released a gas, which flowed through a trough of mercury and was captured for experimentation. Priestley found it made candles burn brighter and faster. Mice confined in 2 ounces of this air would live twice as long as in the same amount of normal air. And breathing it, he would experience a feeling of exhilaration, determining that this gas showed these properties because of a greater ability to absorb phlogiston. So he names it dephlogisticated air, supporting, he thinks, phlogiston theory. 1741. Lord Charles Cavendish, third son of the Duke of Devonshire, walks down the streets of London with his son Henry. They're on their way to this evening's meeting of the Royal Institution to learn from Britain's greatest scientific minds. Ever since his wife, Lady Anne Grey, died during the birth of his second child, Frederick, Lord Cavendish has kept his oldest son close. So young Henry learned politics and science firsthand watching his father work. Henry took almost no interest in politics, but followed his father's lead into science, being accepted into the Royal Society in 1760 at age 27. Cavendish had habits his contemporaries called eccentric. He never spoke to women, leaving notes for his housekeepers to avoid contact with them, going so far as to have a secondary staircase built from his rooms to the street so as not to encounter his house staff as he left his chambers. This here is the only depiction we have of the man, done surreptitiously, because I cannot see him sitting for a portrait. Even in the banquet hall of the Royal Society, the public place where he was most comfortable, persons unknown to him were advised not to directly engage him in conversation. Instead, they should place themselves near to him and speak as if to the room. If he deemed their statement or question of scientific merit, he might grumble a reply. However uncomfortable social situations may have made him, he was twice as comfortable and productive in the lab. Experimenting also with airs, he captured and weighed them with an experimental rigor that far outstripped his peers. believing the only way to achieve uniform results was by creating and following consistent procedure. He was first to isolate the noble gases of the atmosphere. Measuring these airs' solubility in water, specific gravity, and combustion, to him, how readily it absorbed phlogiston. One in particular he called inflammable air because of its incendiary nature. He suspected that inflammable air could even be pure phlogiston. Paris, May 8th, 1794. Amongst the fervor of the French Revolution, a man is led to the guillotine. He has participated in the crown's machine of tax collection and therefore sentenced to die. Before the machinery of revolution renders him silent, he speaks. The revolution has no need of scientists. It's an indication of his resignation to his fate and a condemnation of choosing ideological purity over scientific empowerment. His execution will be remarked upon with these words: "Only a moment to cut off a head, and 100 years may not give us another like it." Rewind 50 years, 1744, Antoine Laurent Lavoisier was born into a wealthy Parisian family. He studied the law like his father and grandfather with an unusual studiousness and concern for the public good, but chose instead to pursue his passions in science. In the 1760s and 1770s, he was absorbed with phlogiston theory. Its assumptions and conclusions, though, did not fit all his experimental evidence. Chemistry at the time was not particularly noted for conceptual clarity or experimental precision. Chemists were more likely described as chemical philosophers. Refining techniques developed by Priestley and Cavendish, he meticulously weighed substances before and after reactions. In some of the reactions thought to be caused by escaping phlogiston, the material in question actually gained mass, not losing mass by releasing substances as the theory would suggest. He discovered that the weight of the reactants stayed equivalent before and after, and developed the theory of conservation of mass. In 1786, he published a paper, Reflections on Phlogiston, that conclusively refuted the theory. He demonstrated when combining Priestley's dephlogisticated air and Cavendish's inflammable air, they formed ordinary water. He named dephlogisticated air oxygen and inflammable air hydrogen, and correctly measured that they combined in a ratio of 2:1, H2O. So what was the integral invention that made that experiment possible? A vacuum pump, invented just over 100 years before by Otto von Guericke. 1789 saw the publishing of a work that can stand among any in the history of science, Elements of Chemistry, in a new systematic order containing all the modern discoveries. Its three most impactful points: that combustion requires oxygen, a gas that had mass and could be measured, unlike phlogiston; that neither air nor water were indivisible or unknowable, but made from more fundamental matter, giving rise to the conception of the elements; that matter is neither created or destroyed, merely transformed into different combinations. And with those three ideas, gave the science of chemistry life. 1993. My sixth grade class has just listened to one of science's founding stories, much like you just have. I'm filled with excitement that great leaps forward in the knowledge of humanity could be made by what seems like interested amateurs. The age of enlightenment is filled with stories like this. The edge of human knowledge is so close at hand, it could be pushed by these gentlemen scientists in their leisure time, doing experiments from a beginner's chemistry set and revolutionizing the world. My classmates may be not as inspired because by that time, the specialization required to make advancement is such a different barrier. The easy wins have already been won. We've pushed that boundary so far that it's out of reach without a doctorate, university labs, government funding. I looked back with nostalgia to a time and place that I never experienced, daydreaming that I could make substantive contributions over the weekend. The past few years that I've worked at thoughtbot, having an open source mindset every day, I've come to realize that right now is that time, and open source is that place. You have a problem, somebody's probably already solved it. And if no one has, you solve it yourself and gift that work to the community. We're all building tools and products that enrich each other's work. In the best circumstances, enrich people's lives. The barrier to entry isn't a PhD, it's an internet connection. And just as the scientists I talked about today built on each other to deliver something greater than them individually, one project builds on the last over and over again, abstractions all the way down. Though there is another similarity between contemporary open source and the age of enlightenment. Because what is the common thread between the scientists of this story? They're all affluent men, either the aristocracy themselves or under the patronage of wealthy generational landowners. In many ways, that is a similar landscape to our open source world. Contributions are skewed toward a disproportionately represented group, either because of the individual constraints like time, access to materials or learning, access to jobs, or uncertain security in those jobs. So while the barrier might seem as low as a laptop and an internet connection, as usual, the story is more than what's on the surface. So what are we supposed to do about it? If you have time, be generous with it. Part of contributing to open source is making room for new community members and helping them get started. Better than advocate, be a sponsor. Pull out the seat at the table or share your own. Advocate for open source at your company. Rather than reactive responding to other products' needs and priorities, active participation in open source is proactive investment in a product's bottom line. And have an upstream first mentality. Build in the open and get support from others solving the same problems. Offload maintenance burden and complexity by making it part of Rails. And come back next year for another Open Summit. We've loved doing these, and thank you for being here this year. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Aji. And thank you to all the presenters and for you participating in thoughtbot Open Summit 2025. Like Aji said, we love doing this. We encourage everybody to get involved in both thoughtbot's open source projects or any open source project across our community. If you're looking for help improving your existing applications or to create something new, thoughtbot is always here to help. Get in touch with us at thoughtbot.com. And we'll see you next year.